Thank you, Madam President, and good morning, Convention. My name is Will Mebane, and I serve as the rector of St. Barnabas' Episcopal Church in Falmouth, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, in the ancestral land of the Wampanoag people of the Sukkonesset. Joining me this morning are the Reverend James Hairston and Ms. Deborah Gardner Walker for this report. And this report is offered with gratitude to all previous co-chairs, current and former subcommittee co-chairs, members past and present of the RJC, and the Commission's staff liaison, the Reverend Canon Dr. Jean-Baptiste Ntagangwa. It is humbling to stand before you today on their behalf. Special thanks and acknowledgement is given to the Reverend Carol Moorhead, co-chair with me of the Commission, for her trusting me with this responsibility while she is out of town and unable to be present at this 239th Diocesan Convention. Carol and I thought perhaps the better use of the time allotted the RJC this morning would be to provide a report to you on how the Racial Justice Commission has worked to fulfill the mandates imposed upon it by previous diocesan conventions. Of course, it is our hope that all delegates and attendees to this convention will avail themselves of the written report from the RJC found on page 813 in the convention handbook, which I'm sure you all have studied carefully. You will find there more specifics about the work of the Commission since we all gathered last year. The chairs of the RJC were directed by resolution passed in 2020 at Diocesan Convention to provide in every subsequent year an update on how the diocese is progressing towards full disclosure of our history and actions to address the issue of racism. This reconstituted RJC was a continuation of the racial reconciliation work begun by the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts in 2018. So the work on which we report to this Diocesan Convention today stands on the courageous shoulders of those pioneering accomplices and allies for racial justice that have come before us. A significant and what might rightly be called historic resolution was passed by the 235th Diocesan Convention of 2020, titled A Call for Repentance and Reparations. The resolution directed Diocesan Council and invited the congregations and institutions of the Diocese of Massachusetts, including the trustees of donations, Episcopal City Mission, the Boston Episcopal Charitable Society, and others, in the name of repentance, reconciliation, and accountability, to our siblings of color in our diocese, to prayerfully and purposefully explore their historic involvement in and present wealth derived from the forced labor of enslaved people. Many attending this convention today accepted that invitation from 4 years ago and began that sensitive and sometimes painful exploration. You are encouraged to review a substantive new history report from the Racial Justice Commission titled, And You Will Know the Truth, and the Truth Will Make You Free, a historical framework for understanding how the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts benefits today from chattel slavery and its legacy. That same resolution passed in 2020 resulted in the creation of the Reparations Committee of the newly formed Diocesan Racial Justice Commission. That committee was requested to prepare a toolbox of resources and expertise to assist congregations and individual Episcopalians in the examination of their assets and their history, or herstory. That toolkit was indeed created and used by parishes in the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. In fact, it is still available on our website and has now been shared across the Episcopal Church with other dioceses and parishes engaged in the work of racial reconciliation. Additionally, the Reparations Committee of the Racial Justice Commission was asked by resolution to explore models and best practices for the creation of a reparations fund and to report to Diocesan Convention on their recommendations for remedies, including the distribution of funds from our unrestricted and restricted endowments in acknowledgement of and repentance for the sin and legacy of slavery. Those among us who have attended previous diocesan conventions will recall the emotion-filled moments when the Reparations Subcommittee of the RJC reported on its work. That reparations fund was indeed created as directed by Diocesan Convention. As if that was not a momentous enough mandate of the 235th Convention in 2020, another resolution that passed was titled A Call to Address the Neglect of the 7 historically Black churches of the diocese and to strengthen their interrelationships. This holy work, this sacred work, through the BIPOC subcommittee of the Racial Justice Commission has proceeded. And you will get just a glimpse of the progress in response to this resolution when you review the written RJC report on page 13 of the convention handbook. Suffice it to say, however, that the directive to the RJC from the 2020 Diocesan Convention to address the neglect of the 7 historically Black churches by our diocese is ongoing. The BIPOC subcommittee of the RJC and Office of Immigration and Multicultural Ministries under the leadership of the Reverend Canon Dr. Jean-Baptiste Ntagangwa have assisted the identified parishes with embracing opportunities to address their own internalized racism, work collaboratively rather than competitively, and develop the capacity to flourish through a discernment process of deep listening and study of shared histories, mutual goals, and collaborations. That work also continues. Beloved, you have heard how the Diocesan Convention of 2020 provided the foundation for the work of the Racial Justice Commission. That foundation was strengthened when the 236th Convention in 2021 charged the RJC with assisting in developing across the diocese a broadly accepted understanding of what actions to take in the name of reparations. The Reparations Subcommittee of the RJC accepted that challenge. It created the means by which the descendants of enslaved Africans and their communities across and within the Diocese of Massachusetts were to be empowered to develop funding priorities, funding strategies, and decision-making structures so that the distribution of monies from the Diocese of Massachusetts Reparations Fund could begin. The foundation upon which the Racial Justice Commission does its work was again strengthened in 2022 when the 237th Annual Convention of the Diocese of Massachusetts approved creation of an Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts Reparations Fund as part of our effort to address our legacy of wealth accumulated through the enslaved labor of Africans and Afro-Caribbeans on our behalf and for our use today. Many of you will remember what was described as the Sea of Green I cards raised in support of the resolution from the Racial Justice Commission, establishing a goal of $11.1 million for the Reparations Fund. That vote by Diocesan Convention passed without debate or apparent dissenting votes. Such consensus was possible in large part because of a designated year of diocesan-wide study and discernment that preceded the vote. Resource materials for use by parishes were provided by the RJC. Included among the preceding materials was a reparations toolkit for use by congregations, a Lenten study program, and a series of online listening sessions arranged by the Reparations Subcommittee of the Racial Justice Commission. The resolution passed at the 237th Diocesan Convention did not detail how the Reparations Fund would operate. The authority for making disbursements was instead put in the hands of a body made up predominantly of people from the communities suffering generations of harm. That body's composition and guiding principles were presented last year by the Racial Justice Commission at the 238th Convention. It was approved by this convention. The Reparations Committee, responsible for dispersing the funds, has now been duly constituted. A second resolution from the RJC urged the Diocesan Budget Committee to allocate annual funding of at least $20,000 for ongoing racial justice work within the diocesan and cathedral staffs. It too was approved last year. The co-chairs of the RJC, its subcommittee co-chairs and members are often asked, what has the Racial Justice Commission done? Even though there is still more to share with you about the work we have done, we hope this report provides answers to that question. The Commission has endeavored to be true to the mandates imposed upon it by diocesan conventions the last 4 years. Our work, however, is not done. Indeed, this 239th convention will be asked to consider a new resolution from the Racial Justice Commission. To tell you about that resolution are Ms. Deborah Gardner Walker and the Reverend James Hairston, co-chairs of the forming Anti-Racist Episcopal Communities Subcommittee of the Racial Justice Commission.
Thank you, Will. Hi, I'm Deborah Gardner Walker, and I'm a longtime member of St. Peter's Beverly.
The Reverend Father James M. Hairston, priest in charge at the Church of St. Augustine and St. Martin in Boston, Massachusetts. We serve on the Racial Justice Commission as co-chairs of the subcommittee forming active anti-racist Episcopal communities. We are here to move the resolution presented by the Racial Justice Commission regarding the newly developed anti-racism program called Dismantling Racism Through Racial Healing. This program was developed by a multiracial cohort of 9 people from around the diocese. They were charged with creating a curriculum specifically for our diocese in response to the work for which it was commissioned, quote, to engage and foster active anti-racist Episcopal communities by having theologically grounded anti-racist formation offerings. Deborah, would you elaborate for the people?
Thank you, James. My pleasure. A group of experienced trainers and facilitators spent a year in prayer, deep thought, and open and trusting conversations. While we all came from different backgrounds, we all shared a strong commitment to our baptismal covenant to strive for justice and peace among all people, respect the dignity of every human being. We consulted on the project with noted racial justice activist and educator Dr. Catherine Meeks. When we're talking about this, it's important to note that the word training is a misnomer. This is not a corporate-style DEI training. It is spiritual formation that invites us to look at the sins, harms, and trauma of racism and how we can all heal. The program takes place over 2 days. It begins with prayer and it ends with the Eucharist and a commissioning to carry forth the work begun in those 2 days, which is to continue examining ourselves and our parishes and to take action for justice. The Dismantling Racism curriculum is envisioned as the first in a series of offerings that will explore and reflect on the experience of all marginalized communities. This particular offering focuses on the Black experience, beginning with racist national policies and how they have played out in Boston, in our dioceses and parishes. The curriculum utilizes discussion along with videos and music. Critical questions provide opportunity for introspection and healing. The program will be offered regionally so that leaders in your deaneries and regions will be able to keep the conversation going together, and hopefully you won't have to drive too far.
The resolution stipulates that the newly developed curriculum be the preferred and primary instrument for anti-racist training because of the care and crafting training specific to the context of our diocese, the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. Without further ado, Deborah and I move that the Racial Justice Commission's resolution as printed in the convention handbook.